Hello, everybody, and welcome to our 31st talk in our NOAA Environmental Leadership Seminar series. The goal of these seminars is to share examples of NOAA's leadership and impact in environmental science by those who lead it and make it happen. My name is Hernan Garcia with NOAA's National Center for Environmental Information, and I will serve as your MC today. I would like to take a moment for a few acknowledgements. First, I would like to thank the NOAA Science Council and the awesome team that implement the seminars. Sandra Clark with NOAA NEST's Office of the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer, Katie Rowley with NOAA OER and NOAA Central Library, and Robert Levy with NOAA Studio Production Manager. We also would like to thank our captioner, Keith Johnson, for making this webinar more openly accessible, and to Loro Chainbosai for moderating the questions and answers at the end of the seminar. Second, I would like to share some seminar logistics. All attendees are muted, and questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. Please type all your questions and comments into the Q&A box at any time, and we will address as many as we can at the end of the seminar. We are recording this seminar for later viewing. Today's NOAA seminar is titled Reflections on Leadership in an Environmental Agency, and our speaker is Dr. John Cortinas. As a brief introduction, Dr. Cortinas is the director of NOAA's Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory, focusing on weather, ocean, and ecosystems in the Atlantic Ocean. Previously, he served as director of the NOAA Weather Program Office. He has served on numerous boards of directors, advisory committees, and senior-level hiring panels. He's also a mentor to many individuals and plays an active role in several scientific organizations that work to improve diversity within STEM fields. For example, at NOAA, he is the executive sponsor of the Latinos at NOAA Employee Resource Group and the executive champion for NOAA's OER Equal Employment Opportunity Advisory Board. Dr. Cortinas received his PhD in geophysical sciences from the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. He has authored and co-authored many scientific articles and served on numerous American and international scientific working groups and committees. Welcome, Dr. Cortinas. Thank you so much for being here. We can't wait to hear about your journey and lessons learned. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Hernan, for that very nice introduction. And I am honored and excited to give this presentation today as part of the NOAA Environmental Leadership Seminar series. First of all, let me thank all the organizers of the seminar series. As Hernan said, this is the 31st. And so I think if anyone hasn't had a chance or maybe joining the series for the first time, all the series have been recorded. And so on the website, I'd encourage you to go back and look at a number of the leaders that have provided presentations and seminars. Really, it's been a fantastic set and catalog, if you will, of seminars that are provided by our current leaders within NOAA. The presentation today that I had takes a different approach. You'll see in the seminar series that the leaders that have given presentations range anywhere from subject matter experts talking about trends in the field to their experiences as leaders. And so I'm going to take that latter approach and talk a little bit about my leadership and what's gotten me to where I am today, but focus more on the future leadership that I think is going to be important for us in NOAA. And so this presentation really is geared more towards the future leaders, those of you that are coming up the ranks today that might be starting in your first position at NOAA or might be a mid-career employee who's considering management or leadership positions. And so this presentation is really for you. And I've looked at the long list of folks and attendees that we have. I'm very excited to have join us a whole number of other leaders within NOAA. And so if we have a little bit of time at the end, what I'd like to have happen throughout the seminar is in the question and answer box. Not only would we want to take your questions, but if other leaders or other people who have been in management positions have other ideas that may, build upon some of the things that I've talked about, I'd like to be able to share that at the end too. So I think collectively as a group, we're actually going to make the greatest impact on our future leaders. So I look forward to doing that. I guess my caveat is that the presentation that I'm going to give is very much largely based on my experience. And I've had about 25 years of leadership experience within NOAA, but by no means do I have all the answers. And I think that's one important thing you learn as a leader, is that you don't have all the answers. And so it's really important that we rely on others around us to help us ensure that the leadership that we're providing really is in the best interest of the organization. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Anyone that's joined NOAA or anyone that's listened to the news anytime more recently is all too familiar with the challenges that our country and the world faces every day. You've seen this chart. This is the 2021 list of billion-dollar disasters. In 2021, we had 20 such disasters that had $1 billion or more in damages. This focuses on weather and climate and doesn't also include some of the hazards and disasters that we've endured in the coastal ecosystem realm as well. Those can be just as disastrous, looking at impacts of climate change or of weather events or other natural disasters on our coastal zones and the ecosystems that they support. But this is no news to us in NOAA. And what we see is that if we look at trends, this isn't changing at all. If anything, it's continuing to increase. So this is the chart by year of those billion-dollar events and looking at the cost in billions of dollars. And if you'll notice on the far right y-axis, we will soon reach $1 trillion disasters. So the billion-dollar disasters that NOAA publishes will soon become trillion-dollar disasters in the not so far future. So this really emphasizes the kinds of things, the importance of what we do here in NOAA and in other environmental agencies in the federal government. What we do is important to society, our livelihood, the protection of our citizenry, and also the world and beyond. So where do we stand today? Well, today in 2022, the kind of events that we're witnessing are all too common, as we've seen in previous years as well, as was indicated in the 2021 map. These are headlines just within the last couple of months, and we're in August. So we can expect that that billion-dollar map is also going to continue to be populated with more and more type disasters that we've seen in the future. So this only goes to show that we are important and that an environmental agency like NOAA must be positioned in order to be able to serve the public, not only at the level at which we do today, but at significantly higher levels. And so the question is, are we ready for that? Do we have the right employees and experts in place? And more importantly, do we have the right leadership to take us there and ensure that we are well positioned to be able to manage the kind of challenges that we have for the future? So if we look even to beyond the future, even beyond today, as I showed, this is a quote from the latest IPCC report saying that beyond 2040, and depending on the global warming, climate change will lead to numerous risks to natural and human systems. And they give that a high confidence. They've looked at a number of key risks and assessed that the long-term impacts will be multiply higher, many times higher than we're currently observing today. So these changes, these climate changes, as well as the impacts that it imposes, are absolutely looking to increase in the future. So we have to be ready for that. So let me step back a little minute, just back a minute and give you a little background of myself to see where I come from. So I was born in Nebraska, grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, born in 1964, which makes me 57 today, almost at 60. And very early on in my childhood, I developed a natural interest in weather. And so I'm one of those, what they call weather weenies, who've always been interested in weather and have been very passionate about it from a very early age. So I followed that desire and pursued my undergraduate degree at a four-year college in Denver, Colorado. And so after graduating from there, I knew that I really wanted to pursue a graduate degree. And so I looked around at a number of universities and wanted to relocate to another part of the country just in terms of my own personal growth, and settled upon Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia. And so there I completed a PhD in geophysical sciences. And that for me was the first introduction to an Earth system approach, understanding the broader impacts of the whole Earth system. And so from there, I got my first postdoc at the University of Oklahoma and moved to Norman, Oklahoma, and joined the Cooperative Institute there, working very closely with the National Severe Storms Laboratory. And I was there for 10 years as a scientist, research scientist, focusing on the use of models for looking at severe storm environments, and then eventually evolved into doing research on winter weather phenomena such as ice storms, looking at the climatology of those and helping to improve predictions of precipitation type. From there, I moved over to Silver Spring to OAR headquarters, and with an initial assignment as the director of the Cooperative Institute program there. That gave me my real first experience of headquarters, and I enjoyed it so much that I stayed on for 8 more years in that role. But I soon started to miss the science a little bit more, and so then when the opportunity became available for the director of the Office of Weather and Air Quality, which is now known as the Weather Program Office, I took it. And it was during my tenure there for the next 8 years that I became a senior executive, leading and become the director of that office. And so for a total of 8 years, I was there and was looking for some other challenges and other interesting things to do. And so then the directorship of the Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory in Miami opened up. And between the weather in the north and the weather in South Florida, I had a hard time saying no. So with that, that's what brought me to AOML in 2019, and I've been here ever since. All right, so when I was in the 1990s, I'm going to take a few snapshots. And again, I think this is important for us to prepare for the future, leadership and the qualities that I'm eventually going to get to. But it's important to kind of assess where we've been, where we are, and where we believe we're going. And so I think that's important to do really for any leader. As the name leadership implies, we are looking forward. We're trying to position an organization, a group, a team, yourself, in order to prepare yourself to lead and be successful in the future. So when I look back in the 90s, when I first started in postdoc, that's when the World Wide Web became just getting started, and the first web browser was produced. For those of you in technology, you'll know that's when Linux became available, something that was open source, if you will, to allow others to use this operating system. Text messaging just got started. That really makes you feel old when you were around when they first started text messaging. But anyway, text messaging got started, and the first Palm Pilot came out, the first handheld and a device that looks like some of the devices that we're currently looking at now. That was back in the 90s. The workforce were primarily made up of the baby boomers, those whose birthdays actually end in 64. I'm the last year of the baby boomers. When people were in their jobs, people tend to stay in their jobs for a long time. They didn't move around. There was not a lot of transitions, and people stayed in one place. Within the environment, this is when attention became very focused on ozone hole, looking at even more strongly at the greenhouse gases and the warming of the environment, and climate change was becoming an important topic. With regard to the scales of modeling, I'm going to focus on the weather scales and climate scales because that's my background, but we were really focused on kind of synoptic scale and just beginning to utilize mesoscale modeling to look at more finer features. But Our grid scalings were on the order of like 25 kilometers at that time. The Weather Channel was becoming very popular, and people were becoming more aware of the weather and environment around them. Kyoto Protocol was something that was going on in the 1990s. With regard to globalization, the Cold War ended. Globalization was beginning to occur. People were starting to recognize the world around them. Fast forward to today. In terms of technology, the digital economy is certainly expanding. People are relying more and more on technology to do purchases, make transactions. We have supercomputers in our phone. The quality of the supercomputers we had early on in the 90s is definitely replicated in our handheld devices. So our processing power significantly increased. And we have this pervasive cell phone use. No one can imagine themselves going anywhere without being connected in one way or another through a cell phone. It's almost amazing how lost you feel if you've left your phone behind. Anyone that knows that feeling, or if you've actually lost your phone, you can become pretty in a state of panic. Our workforce today, more millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, are starting to move into management positions. We're experiencing the need for increased mobility. People don't stay in jobs for long times for their full-time careers. It's very transient. People move around. Capabilities and people's expertise are changing. And a very multidisciplinary environment. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. On the environment, climate change impacts, as we all know, as I had pointed out earlier, are really beginning to be felt. Society is starting to rarely recognize that climate change is happening and things are occurring as a result of that. The predictions that we are now providing at NOAA are much higher resolution, down to storm scale within, meters, hundreds of meters, down to tens of meters at this time. And temporally, kind of output available, but minute by minute. Globalization, we just as we're going through and coming out of COVID, really a recognition of what this world, what the globe is going through together in terms of how our societies are all changing. And economic powers are shifting as different countries become economically viable, or others may fall back, et cetera. We see what's happening in our global environment today. Those things are changing. But let's look ahead to 2030. What will that look like? And at one time, 2030 seemed a long time away, but right now it really isn't. We're only talking about 8 years away. And so I'm going to focus on the 2030s, but you could look 2050s or even farther ahead. But let's look at what's some of the trends that are happening in technology, this human technology connection, just looking with with the Apple Watch and the kinds of biometric information that people are now getting from the technology. That's going to increase as the connection between humans and technology increases. Electronic commerce will continue to dominate, and that will increase. So there'll be a real recognition of the need for connections electronically and through technology. We will have and continue to get a lot more significant information access to all kinds of data and observation available at our fingertips at any time. That will continue to increase. And the way that we do these computations, exascale, is an example of future computing that is going to increase our computing capacity significantly. The workforce, we continue to diversify. We need to tap into the greater changes that are happening within the broader workforce. The workforce is becoming much more technologically proficient. People are growing up now with these devices. It becomes common. This is what people are using every day of their life. And so technologically, the workforce is a lot more proficient, will be proficient, even more so. And I expect the workforce to be quite mobile. Even way beyond where we are in terms of our flexibility of moving between positions, locations, where we work, when we work, those kinds of things. As I mentioned, flexible work days. The work environment itself will be flexible. And our cognitive skills will continue to increase as we're continuing to be pushed, and the need for higher level skills. The environment, climate change impacts will certainly increase, and people will have a much greater recognition of what's happening. There'll be a demand for higher resolution data being available. Very fine scale, both in terms of spatial and temporal scales, as well as very long time scales, and will be expected as well. The integration of environmental data into everything that people do, our actions, our movements, how we plan our days, and how companies run themselves. Much more integration of environmental data. And I believe our marine resources will be becoming even more managed as the cost tied to the economy in terms of marine resources and the recognition of what now we can provide in terms of information and data will continue to increase. In globalization, I believe by then, again, some people predict we will eventually have the global price on carbon and learn to manage our carbon in a way that also is connected to the business community. We will be moving into space, another whole realm that will continue to get development into space. And global powers will continue to change. So that's just kind of the backdrop of where I'm kind of projecting of, broadly speaking, where our globe and society is going. So let's bring me back a little bit more closer to the topic at hand, and that is the leadership. Okay, so where does our leadership fit in what we see as an evolving environment? So I just want to step back, and I think one thing to discuss before we get started is, what makes a highly effective leader? Now, you can read plenty of things, you can talk to many people, and they'll have probably varying opinions about what they think makes a highly effective leader. But I think for me, it becomes very human-centered, and that it focuses more on the people of the organization rather than perhaps a process or the things that are associated with the organization. And so I kind of like this this anagram that Deepak Chopra has put forward. This is 7 powerful traits of highly effective leaders, and I think I'll go on this and go into this a little bit more detail in the talk. But just to kind of start, just to kind of give you a background, and it's easy to remember because it spells out the word leaders. But 1, to look and listen, really listen to what's happening around you, and not necessarily just shout out commands, etc. Emotional bonding. There has to be a connection with the people that make up that organization. Awareness of what's going on around you, what's happening with the people in the organization, what's happening to other organizations, what's happening in our society. Always being aware of your surroundings, if you will. Doing. It's important to execute. That's what it comes down to. We have to execute, but there's a lot of things that go into ensuring that execution is successful. Empowerment, empowering the people to do the work that they need to do in that organization, and empowering the people around you to help you to be the most effective leader as possible. Responsibility, claiming responsibility. The buck stops with the leader. We have to recognize that. But it's important that we also ensure that others around us share part of that responsibility in order to make the organization effective. And synchronicity. Synchronicity is the thought, the understanding of how all the moving parts fit together as the whole. So it's constantly observing, looking at pieces, but also keeping an eye on what's happening in the macro scale and the whole of that organization. So I think those are some of the fundamental aspects of what makes up highly effective leaders. So I'm going to kind of take some of that framework and put it forward. So often I want to also put some caveats out there. Is like, well, if we know we need to do this, why aren't we constantly, preparing for the future as leaders? Because we don't always do a great job of that. And here are a few reasons why I think these are some of the challenges that we have, as leaders and as employees today who may be thinking about being a leader. Insufficient training. We don't always invest in providing leadership training. We like to train people in degrees, et cetera, in their areas of expertise. But in terms of leadership and management, we don't always invest as we should. We become too focused on the process of our organization and not necessarily people or the planet. We have to take that in mind, particularly as an environmental organization. We become very short-term focused. It's the problem of the day. What's happening tomorrow? How will I deal with this next week? What's happening next month? Instead of thinking about how should we prepare for the next 5 years, 10 years, we also have to take that broader outlook. There's a lot of information coming at us from all directions, problems to deal with, people to talk to, things you want to do, things that people want to do, dealing with issues that come up. Lots of information to process, and it's easy to become distracted and put off future leadership until tomorrow. And then then obviously that means, we're often too busy to take the time to think about what we need to do, and are we going to be prepared for what the future holds. So I gave kind of the macro trends. I talked a little bit about the leadership that we know needs to be put in place. So let's look at a scenario perhaps of what NOAA looks like in the 2030s. And it's really kind of a bit of an expansion based on the global trends and what we're doing today. And so I've broken it up kind of into 6 areas: understanding, discovery, monitoring, predictions, service delivery, and data delivery. There are a number of ways you could break these things up, but this is the set that I kind of chose. So under understanding, we're going to be moving more into Earth system connections. It's not going to be just what is the weather doing. It's going to be what is the weather doing and how does that impact the coastal zone. It's going to be, we have changes in ocean circulation. How will that change climate? How will that change our weather patterns? So there'll be a much more of a connection between the Earth system. We'll focus on that. Social science will continue to be an important aspect of what we do, and the integration will be much more and inclusive of what we're doing today. And we will be required to provide all kinds of scales of information and data that we're learning to understand, global scale phenomenon, as well as micro scale phenomenon. The public will demand all of that. Discovery, that will continue. Right now, we have the greatest, probably most invested area of discovery in ocean discovery, but we have discoveries in all our disciplines. But this is one area that I think is certainly going to continue. Under monitoring, high resolution Earth system monitoring, go way beyond where we are today and looking at different ways of collecting those observations. Partnerships will continue to be absolutely critical in terms of how we monitor the planet. And space weather observations will no doubt become critically important as we continue to explore in space. Our predictions will be very high resolution and be inclusive of the Earth system. We will need to make sure that we're providing predictions that are in actionable timelines, lead times that allow people, businesses, societies enough time to prepare. And these predictions are going to have to be highly accurate. Under service delivery, we will need to be very much engaged with our users and our stakeholders to understand their needs so that we can deliver them. Our service delivery will be continuous. It won't necessarily be at prescribed time, but it will have to be available most times and customizable for the customer and the user. And data delivery, fully accessible to a whole number of users that may need it. And extensive data integration. We will be asked for data that can integrate, as I mentioned, in almost everything that society is doing. That's going to certainly continue. So I'm not going to focus on this talk on the kind of technological advances that we're going to do or specificity in terms of the fields of science that we're invested in. But I think one thing that NOAA has done is that we've begun to prepare ourselves by looking at emerging technologies and tools in the set of emergency S&T strategies that we developed under the last administration. So those 6 are still available, and those 6 are still something that we're engaged in at NOAA, and I think are critically important as we position ourselves to deal with the challenges of the future. So if you haven't had a chance to look at these as a future leader, these are things that are important to look at and understand in terms of positioning ourselves and our workforce to deal with the future society that we'll need to serve. So let's go back now to the focus, and that would be effective future leadership. And so, as I mentioned before, if you ask 12 people what they think are the important leadership elements for preparing us, you'll probably get perhaps 12 different answers. But what I've tried to do is synthesize things based on my experience, as well as others around me that I observed, many of my mentors that I've even tried to replicate. So I feel very comfortable and been able to put into practice a number of these things. And I feel based on my experience that they've had a payoff and I think are worthy of consideration by others. So this is an example of where if there are other leaders on the call and listening in, as I go through some of these, if you have things to add and I'm missing something or something I hadn't thought about, I think that'd be great to maybe share with the greater audience. So just type those in the question and answer box as well. And if we have time, we'll be able to share those with others as well. So anyway, I'm going to go into each one of these and talk a little bit about how I feel that it'll prepare us for the future. So emotional intelligence, for those of you who may or may not be familiar with this term, emotional intelligence is really a skill in perceiving, understanding, imagining, and managing emotions and feelings. And as I said, I think the future workforce, even our workforce today, and our leadership is increasingly focused on the human dimension of leadership, and less focused on the specificity and the technological developments. Those you leave to the experts. But as a leader, this is one important element that I think is important to consider. So this notion of utilizing emotional intelligence in the way that we manage our workforce is critically important. And so I'm going to begin to touch on these topics. And so I would encourage anyone who's thinking about leadership and looking to prepare themselves for the future to spend some time and do a little homework and dig into a number of these capabilities and elements and learn a little bit more about it for yourselves, and then just kind of build that. Let that be the starting point for you in your learning journey, which I'll also talk about as one of the elements of leadership that will continue beyond. But in terms of emotional intelligence, it really is made up of 4 components. It's a self-awareness, understanding yourself as a leader, self-management, how you're able to manage your own emotions and the way you may react or the way you approach things, social awareness, the way things are occurring around you, and then relationship management, how you interact with those around you, other groups, other managers, other employees, other organizations. So this is an important component I think that I try to utilize in the development of my leadership, very much focused on how do I connect with myself in order to connect with others and ensure that we have the best organization as possible, and that your employees, those that are working with you, are going to be happy to work with you and want to continue to work with you. The second element, I think, is also very important, and it's great to see that our organization in NOAA is really embracing the notion of diversity and inclusion. Our population is becoming increasingly diverse in a number of dimensions. And so that means we have to ensure that our future workforce will also be available and be able to be trained. Our current population is that they're trained in order to provide that workforce of the future, which means we have to make sure that we tap into all the capabilities and talent that we have in our current population. And so increasingly, I think emphasis needs to continue to be on diversity and ensuring that we're pulling the best and the brightest from our entire population for the future workforce. Our mission complexity, as it continues to increase, will require that we get the best and the brightest. And so we do not want to leave any stone unturned to find hidden talent from areas of our society, portions of our society that perhaps in the future were not considered. I believe that by having a diverse kind of workforce and diversity around you, it really contributes to the need for this holistic approach, the Earth system approach in our case, to understanding our problems and how to solve them. So I see diversity as an increasingly very important aspect of ensuring that we have effective leadership, particularly in the future. Diversity and inclusion are often mentioned in the same phrase, but they're not exactly the same thing. And so I think it's also important to really separate them and think about, not only focusing on the diversity, tapping into the broader population and diversity of ideas, but once you've been able to tap into the diversity, it's important to provide inclusion so that you can make that diversity work in your organization. So the focus on inclusion goes beyond just in terms of diversity and inclusion, but it goes to setting up processes and a culture in your environment that makes people feel that they can contribute, that their expertise is important, and that they might have that perspective that others have not had, but it's important for you as a leader to understand and hear from them as well, because we really need to hear all views and opinions in order to ensure that we're making the right decision. And so it helps to inform those important leadership decisions. It helps to promote employee participation. Everyone likes to be heard. Everyone likes to feel that they're making a contribution. Anyone who's experienced being looked over or any ideas you put forward that were not considered really gets a sense of how it feels to have something to offer, yet it's not considered, when really it could have solved a particular problem. So this kind of inclusive environment helps to promote more employee participation when employees know they'll be heard, that their contributions are important. And again, it recognizes those employee contributions. So inclusion, although often considered with diversity, is a separate thing, but you really need the inclusiveness to make that diversity work. Collaborations. The challenges and problems that we are going to have to deal with really require collaborations of multidisciplinary activities. And so we need to focus on continuing to build the right partnerships and across our own organizations, with other organizations, and even those organizations that in the past we may not have worked with. Because we're finding that as we become more integrated, as we look holistically, we need to consider these other disciplines. Social science, most recently, is a great example of something that NOAA, at least many parts of NOAA, had not considered. And increasingly, as we begin to realize the value of understanding the society we serve, we're in a much better position to serve them in a way that makes sense. And in terms of building these collaborations, I think there's always opportunities for win-win interactions. We are all trying to deal with these situations together, and we all have areas of expertise that we can add. So finding the best way to make these kind of collaborations work will be a win-win for everyone, and it should be promoted as such. Flexible workplace. This will increasingly, you just need to look around today to see the real need and desire for many of our employees at NOAA, as well as other federal agencies, as well as across society. This need for flexibility, as we all experienced during COVID, really has us thinking differently about how we work, how we produce things, how we work together. And so this idea of flexible workplace is certainly going to be something that's critically important. We're going to have to find ways to make this happen in terms of the development of our workspaces, development our policies to ensure that we can still be inclusive. We can still apply some of these other elements to employees that may be right in front of us, as well as those that may be around the other side of the globe from us. So I think a flexible workplace is going to increasingly be important, and we will need to continue to work on how to make this happen. Work-life balance. Again, I think something all of us have recognized even more so with COVID, and started to gain a greater appreciation of the need to ensure that there is this work-life balance. It's that balance between what you do at work and what you accomplish in your private life. And for each person, that's going to be a little bit different, but it's certainly an important aspect that we as leaders need to keep in mind, because the people that work in an organization don't turn off at the end of the day of a work day. They go home, they have other issues. We all have other issues. We should put ourselves in the place of everyone that works in that organization to realize that we do have to recognize people's personal lives as well as our work lives, and how we make the two blend together. So we'll need to continue to put an emphasis on that, because it really becomes one of the most important components of an overall healthy work environment. And then one of the things I think we've been starting to recognize now that we always have to be aware of for the future is the stress that we impose, the stress that we create in our work environments impacts that work-life balance and can throw everything off. And so I think we're beginning to look at that in NOAA today, but as a future leader, these things will become very much important in terms of working with your employees, creating an organization that had policies that recognize and value a healthy work-life balance. Learning culture. As I mentioned early on, just kind of as a starting point for leaders of the future, these elements, I hope that you'll look at and begin to do homework and kind of teach yourself. There's a lot of material out there, books, web, training opportunities. It really requires an investment in the training for yourself as a leader or as a manager. And you can manage or lead a group of one or a group of 1,000, many of these elements are all very applicable to leadership, but you do have to make that investment. There should be a recognition that there's specific training for leaders and managers. You cannot become a leader or manager overnight, at least an effective one. We try that and it doesn't always work. So developing a learning culture for yourself, but also for your organization. Things will not be stagnant. In the future, we are going to have to learn to endure ongoing change and ongoing changes in our environment, ongoing changes and stresses on the kind of information and data that society asks for. We see that today with our new discoveries. We present what we can do and people want even more. So we need to constantly be in an environment where we're providing opportunities for learning all the time. It's important to do that because it will then help strengthen our knowledge base, but it also can be used to inform organizational changes and provide strategic flexibility. So as I said, as an organization, we are going to have to learn to adapt a lot quicker to changes in our society than we will today. And maintaining learning throughout in that culture will definitely help facilitate that. It also invests in employee development. We want our employees to be the best they can be. We want anyone working for such an organization to help and be able to contribute as much as they can. And so learning is an important component to that. So that should be supported in whatever way is appropriate, but it should never be discouraged. And I think a recognition that learning needs to continue no matter what level you are. I'm continuing to take learning classes myself. I will always sign up for a number of seminars or go to training sessions and seminars. We are always constantly learning, and that's going to be important, particularly for the future. Innovation is important. The need to try new things, push ourselves to the limit, but importantly, allow for failure. We are often hesitant and very, very conservative in our approaches because we're afraid to fail. We need to move past that because the greatest innovations will occur when we do allow for some of those to fail. And so I know that a number of our leaders today have continued to try to pursue and push innovation within our agency. Rick Spinrad's mentioned this numerous times, but as part of that, we do have to experience that failure as well. And we need to keep reinforcing this. Innovation will occur if we set up the culture, if we set up the learning opportunities, if we allow our employees to fail, but continue to reinforce the need for innovation and solicit new ideas for how do we promote innovation within our organizations. The use of technology will continue to be important. Expansive amount of data will require very new technologies on how we integrate this data, how we share the data, how we view the data. Virtual reality will be very close at hand. I didn't list it on the technologies, but I think that's another area that's going to be significantly changing by 2030. So how do we view all of this data? Artificial intelligence, et cetera, of the use of those technologies will be critically important as we deal with this massive amount of data that an organization like ours, like any environmental organization, will need to deal with. Flexible work environments will require those additional tools for collaborating and communicating, no matter where the person is. And our new workforce expects the technology because they're using it in their personal lives today. You know, younger, early career scientists who have grown up with technology expect that we will have a work environment that supports that as well and goes above and beyond the kind of technologies that we're familiar with. So technology use is important. Communication will continue to be important, both internal and external. We need to continue to market what we do. We're trying to do that within NOAA today, but it's important for society to understand what we're doing and how we deliver that. And communication becomes everyone's responsibility, the leader, as well as the individual scientists, as well as our admin folks who do a great job at supporting what we do, our IT support, our engineers, social science. Everyone needs to participate in the communication aspect of what we do, because our greatest accomplishments will go unnoticed if no one knows about them. We'll continue to be data-driven. The increasing use of data analytics will help guide our decisions. I'm using that in a number of the things that we're doing at the laboratory I am doing today in terms of looking at our communication strategy, how our website's being used, how our social media is being interpreted so that we can make adjustments and continue to make changes so that we can make improvements to get our messages across on that communication style, on that communication, but also in terms of the policies we set up for our workforce. It will also help gain support from a scientific organization in particular, like NOAA. We're science-driven. And so that data is important in terms of making our decisions of what we do moving forward and getting support we need for those decisions. And it will help inform our science and organizational decisions moving forward. I'm almost at the end here, so I want to allow a little bit of time for questions. We'll answer some of those, but change management. I mentioned before, the speed at which information will be generated will require much quicker change than we are today, both in terms of the kinds of things that we study, the amount of time it takes to, let's say, publish and produce results, the time it takes to transition results into operations, the time it takes to evaluate which operations are no longer needed or which ones are needed. These things are going to happen at a much faster pace than we're accustomed to today. So we need to be thinking about how do we set up an environment that will facilitate quick change and support that kind of a culture, and introduce change that, although may be rapid, can also be incremental, so that we can adjust and make additional changes along the way if we're about to produce a new software, that we don't necessarily produce the software, then turn it over to the user and they can't use it. We engage the user, we do incremental changes. Incremental changes are absolutely important, but we have to have the culture that will allow that. All right, so I've gotten to the end pretty much, and I just want to summarize that NOAA continues to evolve to respond to our population changes and events. And in order to stay relevant and resilient, NOAA's leadership will also need to continue to evolve. The future will require NOAA leadership to continue increasing focus on its people and certainly our planet. And NOAA's leaders that constantly pursue evolving elements of excellent leadership will ensure that NOAA continues to be one of the leading U.S. government environmental agencies in the world. So with that, let me bring on Laura, who's going to help me out in collecting who got the questions, and we're going to read those and share whatever comments we had.
Thanks, John. That was great. Yeah, we have several questions so far, but if you would like to ask John a question, please feel free to enter it into the Q&A box. So we're going to start off with Sarah's question. She asks, understanding that NOAA is a science-based agency, what recommendations do you have for people without PhDs who want to get into management and leadership positions?
Great question. And I've heard this question before, and it is absolutely by no means a requirement to have a PhD, even in a scientific organization, to move into management and leadership positions. So let me reiterate what I said before. You know, management positions and leadership positions occur at various levels. You know, we have team leaders. You know, you could be a group leader. It might be a project leading a team or a partnership with you and another person that is necessary for a short period of time. So I think in many of those leadership or management roles, I'll say, certainly PhDs are not required, and many times that's how things operate. You don't need that. But in more formal roles, I'd say we have a lot of good examples, even in OAR where I work, where we have labs that are led by people that don't have PhDs. But I think what's important is that you demonstrate many of the qualities that I just described in terms of leadership, as well as a good and sound understanding of the technical aspects and the science that goes along with that. And so I think that's a great question. And I would say just being able to pursue the qualities of leadership is going to be extremely important, and become as knowledgeable as the subject matter is important to understand at a general level, not necessarily a lot of specificity.
Great. Robert has a timely question. How do you keep remote team members feeling included in a hybrid work environment?
Yeah, I think we're all trying to struggle and figure out what that means. You know, with some of the things that we're doing within my laboratory, and we've done before, because telework is not anything new. We've just never, you know, been involved with it to this extent. But one, I think we're trying to make sure that we have the technology in place that will allow both the remote users and the in-person users to participate in the same way. I think it's important as a leader, though, to check in with those people that are remote, even one-on-one, because often when you're in the same place, it's easy to pass perhaps people in the hallway to say hi, kind of recognize and take that opportunity to find out how they're doing, how their work is going. But when you're in a remote opportunity, those kind of opportunities don't occur as often. So I think it's incumbent upon the leader to also reach out to employees to make sure and have that engagement as much as possible as you would in kind of the face-to-face engagement.
Mm-hmm. I think this is, we have only a few more minutes, but I think this is an interesting question that Tamara brings up. So a lot of what you talked about is for early or mid-career scientists maybe, and she's asking, what about for people in current leadership positions that find it hard to change or transition to new ways of thinking and doing things, which needs to happen? So what can be done to help current leadership embrace such quote unquote radical changes as flexible workplaces, trusting younger staff, and taking risks?
Well, that's a good question. How do you, I think there's a couple things. One is if you've heard of, how do you manage up? So for employees that feel that, and even leaders we all have bosses as well. I have a boss and my boss has a boss, et cetera. And so there are ways of managing upwards, the people that you report to. So I'd look into, different techniques about how do you manage up. I think other ways could be, it's going to be based on those other managers that are at the same level as those other leaders, let's say, that can show by example. There is such thing as peer pressure at the leadership level. All leaders like to look good and that they're doing their job. So if I see someone else is doing a great job and they're getting all the attention, I'm going to take a look at myself and say, how can I be more like them? Because they seem to be doing so well and my organization may not be doing as well. So I think there's a bit of peer pressure that can occur as well.
Do you have any favorite leadership training course, certificate, or book recommendations?
I really don't. I mean, because leadership is also something that's evolving, as I said. And so there were books that were back in the 90s that really are not relevant to leadership styles today. So it really does take a lot of looking on the internet, talking to other people, see what is it that they use. I like looking at the Harvard Business Review. That's a publication that I found extremely helpful and very, very reputable. So I would look at that. There's a GovExec website, GOVEXEC, that many people use because it's focused on the government, federal government, and it also touches on a number of leadership and management articles, etc.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to sort of combine a couple of them. Similar questions were asked. And people are wondering about maybe either a specific event or experience you had when you were younger that made you more likely or able to rise up in the ranks and be the leader you are today. Is there sort of anything that comes to mind that you either experienced or did purposefully, something like that sort of you credit your leadership to?
I think a lot of it comes down to I'm the oldest child of 5. And by default, you're kind of put out there on your own to figure it all out. And then others just naturally follow you. So anyone that's the oldest can probably relate to that. But I do feel that very early on, even in school, I had a natural affinity for kind of working with people to try to get the best out of people, to try to accomplish things that maybe, we were working on a class project. And I was anxious to make sure we had the best project. And if others didn't step up, I felt someone had needed to help coordinate. I don't necessarily want to stand out in front, but I felt like I would be valuable in terms of how to get people to work together and to accomplish that greater good. Is there any, Laura, before we end, is there any other additional leadership things? It looks like maybe Danae, Carlos mentioned the aspect of transparency for leadership.
Yeah, that's the only one that I saw.
Okay, very good. Yep, I agree, Danae. Transparency is an important element of what leaders today and absolutely in the future will need in order to bring the organization forward.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn it back over to Hernan.
Thank you. So, Dr. Cortinas, any closing words or comments?
I guess the only thing I would say is I've worked with so many people in this organization and extremely proud of being associated with NOAA. And I see so many people that are starting their careers or mid-careers that that's not me, that's that's not me playing in. Is that it gives me hope for the future that we're going to be in good hands in NOAA. And I know that we're going to be able to serve society in a way that is going to go way above and beyond where we are today.
Great. Thank you so much again for a terrific talk. And thank you to Laura and Keith. Our next NOAA Environmental Leadership Seminar will be September 14 by Dr. Paul Schultz, the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Ocean Services and Coastal Zone Management at NOAA. We thank everyone for joining us. Goodbye.